And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Thank you all for joining us. Good morning, those who are joining and coming in. We've done a count of attendees and we have a quorum, so we're in position to take action today. As you are reminded on our agenda packet that per the MPO bylaws, all speakers are asked to address only the presiding chair for recognition, and please confine your remarks to the questions under debate. We've had really good response from this, so I appreciate everyone working that way during these Zoom presentations. The first item on our agenda, or the next item on our agenda, is public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment for this month's meeting?
I don't see any hands raised under the, oh, I see Chris Vella.
Okay, Mr. Vella, you're recognized for your 3 minutes of public comment.
Hang on a minute. Let me see if I can unmute him.
Once we get him on.
Morning, everybody. Chris Vella here. So I have just a couple of items I wanted to touch upon on this agenda. So this is Chris Vella, 33605. If you notice in the first part of your agenda, we really don't have an interstate problem. The interstate's actually looking in great shape in terms of reliability. So I'm referring to Johnny Wong's report. The state of condition is just probably like a percentage point away. And here we are, allowing the 10 Bay Next project to proceed forward. The interstate is not necessarily a problem. It's actually the surface roads. And more importantly, it's transit. You can see the rolling stock is in bad shape, as well as the equipment, which leads to the other situation that we have, which is the bus stops. And so I want to quickly say for Route 48, I recommend option 1 and option 1 for Route 14. You guys can make a recommendation to MPO, even though it's not an action item. And realize that a lot of these bus connections are going to hospitals, they're going to airports. Why can't the Aviation Authority put some more money to keep the service going? Because they get a lot of money from FDOT. Same thing can happen with the hospital. HART needs to ask for more money if it's going to major employment centers from these people to keep the service going while we wait for AFT. In regards to West Shore, we know that it's a deadly area for pedestrians, so I recommend that FDOT complete their trail north of Carmen Street. That trail needs to link to Lemon Street, which goes all the way to Cypress Point. A lot of cyclists use that area. A lot of cyclists use Gray Street and West Shore area. So we need to make sure that that intersection, whatever work that happens, is preserved so cyclists can go to the mall or they can go to Lemon Street, because that's the only way. Cypress sucks for cyclists, so it's too dangerous to even do anything over there. And just one other thing with the bus situation. I would make sure that with these changes that everybody has safe access to the bus shelters. They're going to have to walk further. It's going to be nasty when it floods. It's going to be horrible when it rains. It's going to be hot. We need to make sure that everything's adjusted so people can get to the bus stop, because to me, this is looking like a Title VI violation when we're like fine-tuning an interstate that's slightly, used compared to all these bus stops or routes that are being cut back and a horrible rolling stock. So please take that into consideration. Remember, you can do recommendations to the MPO board, even though these are non-action items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vella. Any other public comment? Hearing or seeing none, we'll close that portion of the agenda. Next item on the agenda is the members' interests. Do we have any members of the committee that want to bring forward suggested items for future discussion? Christine Acosta is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This week, City Council in Tampa was presented with a speed reduction with the result of work they had put together at request of the council earlier this year to consider speed throughout the city, and especially including Bayshore Boulevard. And they did a fantastic presentation that I think this committee would appreciate hearing firsthand from the city of Tampa. So I'd like to suggest or make a motion that we add that to some future agenda.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
very good.
I don't think a motion is necessary.
Okay.
I think we'll reach out to the city and see if they can, if we can schedule them.
Good. Thank you, Christine. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I have just one item that I want to bring up for the committee. The school board appeared before the county commission and discussed the condition of roadways and feeder roadways particularly in the South County area with regard to the building of new schools. This is to me, this is a critical item, and it's one that this committee might want to take a look at in the future. The request from Amber Dickerson at the school board was that they form a study committee. I would like to ask if staff can come back and give us some sort of a briefing at the very least as to how this problem is being addressed, and we can consider taking action at a future meeting. Any other items?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is David Bailey.
Yes, David.
I would also like to add to that because one of the streets that really is in need and is a feeder street is the Bomb Road off of 301. There's a new high school that was just built there, and that's exactly. I think you're amplifying. I just want to amplify your point with this example. And I think a while back there was a study that should have been done to help widen that street, but it was shot down. And so I think this would be a good time to reevaluate that street or road in particular, because that is a huge need right now in the South County area. So I just want to amplify your point on that and bring up an example.
Thank you. Thank you. I bring this issue to the committee because I think South County deserves a lot of attention. And I think that lessons in the 70s in the North County, and hopefully those lessons have been well learned, and at least we have a plan in place so we can address the funding needs for that area. Anything else in members' interests come before the committee?
This is Vivian Handy. I think it was
Good
David that
morning,
brought up
Vivian. You're recognized.
Okay, thank you. That the bomb widening one that actually did move forward. I remember bringing that up, and the CAC voted it down, but the MPO actually went forward with it because of the school issue. So
Mr. Chairman?
I think we might be a little behind on those things, but I do agree with that motion of South County needing attention, and we're very much putting the cart before the horse because development is overrunning everything, and then we end up with the school issue as well as the traffic issue, obviously. So just wanted to put that out there.
Good. Thank you, Vivian, for that update. And my request really is to get a staff report on what planning is in place to address the issue. Someone else have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, this is Rich.
Yes, Rich.
Actually, Baum Road, we have a little bit of information that I'll be talking about later on in the meeting because it was not a new request. Mr. Bailey had brought it up last month.
Yes.
So I have a number of items as follow-ups from last meeting. The other thing I'd like to suggest is that we have Cheryl call the roll just to make sure we know who's on the line.
Good.
I skipped over introductions.
Okay. Cheryl, if you would call the roll, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Rick Fernandez,
I'm here.
Hoyt Prindle,
Here.
David Bailey,
Present.
Vivian Handy,
Present.
Stephen Hollenkamp,
Here.
Nicole Rice,
Present.
Christina Costa,
Here.
Bill Roberts,
Here.
Edmund Merzitsky,
Here.
Jeff Lucas,
Here.
Cliff Reese,
Yes.
Lou Prida,
Here.
Camilio Soto,
Here.
Terrence Trott,
Here.
Amy Espinoza,
Here.
and Rick Bridgman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we did have a new member appointed to represent the city of Temple Terrace. That would be Letitia Walker. I don't know if she's on the line or not.
She's not present.
Okay. Well, if she is able to join us at our next meeting, I'll try to remember to introduce her. Bill, I can't hear you.
Now, there we go. Thank you. So yes, Rich, thanks for making that introduction, and hopefully she'll be able to join us either in this meeting or later on. Rick Fernandez, do you have a member's interest item?
Yes, Chair, thank you. When I was going through the minutes last night, I was reminded of the chair's request at the last meeting that there be an agenda item added to this meeting regarding sections 6 and 7 of Tampa Bay Next, the downtown interchange, and the section of the interstate north of the downtown interchange up to Beers. The underlying reason being that there was some express confusion at the MPO meeting when they reviewed the tip. I'm just curious, I don't see a specific item on the agenda referencing that. I'm wondering if it's picked up somewhere, but not specifically.
So we have a number of follow-up items from the August meeting, and I was going to address that at that time.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other comments under members' interests? Okay, seeing no hands or hearing none, we'll move into the next section of our meeting, which is the approval of the meeting summary from August 12th. The minutes have been circulated as part of your packet. Are there any questions about the minutes? If not, we'll entertain a motion for approval.
Also move. This is Rick Fernandez.
Mr. Fernandez moves approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
This is Camilo Soto, I second.
Mr. Soto, second. Any discussion on the minutes summary? Or the meeting summary, excuse me. Rich, is a roll call vote required for this approval?
So at your prerogative, I'd say if you want to do it by voice vote and see if there's any dissenters, that's fine.
Okay. Let's just do a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the meeting summary of the August 12th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none, that the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. We move now into our action items. Action item A is the reevaluation of the transit asset management and bridge system performance targets. Mr. Wong, are you available to give this presentation?
Yes, I am. Can you all hear me?
We can. Good morning.
All right, great. Good morning. All right, as soon as Rich maximizes that, I'll get started. Thank you for having me. So I'm here today to, well, let me introduce myself. Johnny Wong, MPO staff. I'm here to provide you with a status update of our performance for 3 federally required measures, which are transit asset condition, pavement and bridge condition, and system performance. Next slide, please. All 3 of these measures originate from MAP 21 and FAST Act legislation. Both of those pieces of legislation emphasize performance-based planning and accountability regarding transportation investments. The requirements found in this legislation prescribe specific performance measures that DOTs and MPOs are required to calculate and then track over time. MPOs beginning in 2016 have had to set targets for some of these measures. So beginning in 2016, we brought forward safety targets for you all to adopt. And then in 2018, we embarked on the transit asset, pavement, bridge, and system performance targets. Next slide, please. So for many of you, this activity is not new, but I know that since we engaged in this in 2018, there have been a number of new members. So I'll try to provide some context so that we're all on the same page. Like I mentioned, beginning in 2016, we've been producing safety analyses. We present these to committees each year, and then each year the MPO board reviews performance and has an opportunity to adjust targets to ensure that we're making progress toward meeting those targets. So safety is the unique one because that is done each year. We're required to set quantifiable targets, and these are like fatalities, serious injuries, fatalities and injury per VMT. The other targets, the ones that we're discussing today, are done every 4 years. So the first time that the MPO set targets was in 2018. And again, those are regarding transit asset condition, pavement and bridge, and system performance. Over a 4-year period, DOTs and MPOs track performance or track progress toward achieving those 4-year targets. And in 2020, where we're at now, this is the midpoint. So really what I'm providing you today is a status update or like a report card so that we can see how we're doing. We don't really have the opportunity to adjust these targets today, but this presentation should inform a decision about whether to adjust them in 2 years. So the first performance category that we'll look at is transit asset condition. Next slide, please. Transit asset management is commonly abbreviated as TAM. TAM can be thought of more as a process. That process involves creating an inventory of assets owned by HART or really any transit agency, assessing the condition of each asset according to prescribed standards, and establishing a business strategy to fund maintenance of these assets at the appropriate time. The goal for timing maintenance of these assets is to ensure that we're maximizing the value of that asset over its life cycle. In most cases, this doesn't mean fixing a problem as soon as it's noticed, right? Because the investment in performing the mechanic work, let's say we're talking about buses, the investment in paying for resources to work on the bus may be more than the value that we get out of working on the bus at that time. So this is a very complex topic, and it's managed by transit asset professionals. In fact, HART just recently brought a new staff member aboard to manage this program only. And so all of the information that I'm providing you today has been discussed with that new transit asset manager. Another key concept to recognize is state of good repair, or SGR. SGR means that assets are performing their intended function, they're performing that function safely, and the investment has been recovered. Next slide, please. The TAM rule applies to all transit providers that receive federal funding. There are 2 tiers of transit agencies. A tier 1 agency is a large agency that maintains a specific number of buses. HART would fall into that large category. They're a tier 1 agency. Tier 2 agencies include things like the Sunshine Line, T-BARDA. Those agencies are responsible for TAM performance and targets and reporting those, but they report directly to the state, not the MPO. So all of the statistics that I'm providing to you today are specific to HART. So a tier 1 agency, sorry, you jumped me, Rick, can you go, or Rich, can you go back one?
Sorry.
A tier 1 agency, all agencies are required to inventory assets that were purchased for more than $50,000, and they inventory them by placing them into one of 4 categories that are shown in this slide. Either rolling stock, which is vehicles that transport passengers, equipment, which could include service vehicles, just like HART specific vans that are accessible to agency staff, facilities, or infrastructure. Once they're inventoried and categorized, they rate the condition and create a process to optimize maintenance timing. Following that, they coordinate with MPOs and DOTs to establish performance targets related to % of each asset category in a state of good repair. And if all of that was very complicated, I'll break it down in simpler terms, hopefully on the next slides. Next slide, please. It's not necessarily intuitive, but all of the performance measures are reported as assets that are not in a state of good repair. So what we're looking for is a number close to 0. A number of 0 would mean that everything at HART is performing safely, performing its function well, and asset and value has been recovered. When we set these targets back in 2018, the % of rolling stock vehicles that were not in a state of good repair was 28%. Since then, the performance has degraded considerably. So the % of assets, the % of rolling stock not in a state of good repair jumped up by 13%. That seems fairly high, but it's not atypical based on industry standards. So according to the size of HART's fleet, if the agency were able to replace 16 buses each year, the % of the fleet in good repair would remain consistent. But there are times where HART is in a period of boom, so they can order maybe 30 or 40 buses to be replaced in a given year. And there's also periods of bus where they can only afford maybe a handful of buses to be replaced. So this % of vehicles in a state, not in a state of good repair, we would expect to fluctuate considerably until the agency gets a consistent revenue stream that allows them to appropriately time bus replacements. Until that happens, we're going to see this number jump around quite a bit. Next slide, please. The second asset category is equipment. The total % of equipment assets not in a state of good repair in 2020 is 32.5, which is 13% worse than what we saw in 2018. Again, this jump seems pretty high, but it's not atypical for the industry. These types of vehicles have a much shorter lifespan than 40-foot CNG buses. They typically only last about 5 years. So we shouldn't be surprised to see this number jump around anywhere between 20 to 25% from year to year. And again, that is assuming that there is no consistent revenue stream. If HART had that revenue stream, then they would be able to time these asset replacements more appropriately. Next slide, please. The third asset category is facilities. Facilities are broken down into 2 subcategories. The first is passengers and parking facilities like parking lots, bus stops. In 2018, 10% of those facilities were not in a state of good repair. Over the past 2 years, HART has made a number of investments to improve that. They've dropped that percentage down to 0. So that's something to be applauded. The second subcategory of facilities is administrative and maintenance facilities, basically the headquarters for HART. When the asset was inventoried in 2018, they showed 0% in a state of, 0% not in a state of good repair. Since then, they have shown that almost 30% of the facilities are not in a state of good repair, and we expected that this was the case because when they provided us with the statistics in 2018, they had not inventoried the heavy maintenance facility. That's a very large facility, and we've known about its problems for quite a while. There are major issues at the H&M facility, including leaky roofs. And I will say that with HART investing in electric buses, electric vehicles and roof leaks don't mix. So this is a pretty high priority for the agency to invest in and get that facility brought up to a state of good repair. Next slide, please. The final asset category is infrastructure. HART does not own the streetcar assets. That's actually owned by the city of Tampa. So the rail was not inventoried as part of HART's TAM plan, but we reached out to the city of Tampa and they affirmed that 0% of the tracks have performance restrictions. So that's no different from 2018. Next slide, please. And of course, the MPO wants to work to allow HART to improve its asset condition. We have prioritized about $4 million a year in grant funds over the past 5+ years for bus replacements. We've also prioritized $10 million in grants to invest in a CAD AVL system, which is vehicle location and tracking. We've also prioritized $1 million for improvements to the Marion Transit Center. Next slide, please. The second performance rule is pavement and bridge condition. Next slide. Under this rule, DOTs and MPOs are required to establish pavement and bridge targets for the national highway system and report them in our TIPs and LRTPs. When we established targets back in 2018, the MPO agreed to support a statewide target, which is shown on this slide. The statewide targets are to have greater than 60% of interstate pavements in good condition and less than 5% in poor condition. To have greater than 40% of non-interstate NHS pavements in good condition and to have less than 5% in poor condition. And for bridges, to have greater than 50% in good condition and less than 10% in poor condition. Next slide, please. Over the past 2 years, the performance of each of these asset categories has remained fairly stable. Back in 2018, when the targets were set, we were not meeting the target for interstate pavement in good condition. Over the past 2 years, we've increased that percent by almost 10. When the 4-year targets are up for reevaluation in 2 years, it's very likely that we're going to exceed that target of 60%. Both interstate and non-interstate pavements in poor condition declined nominally. In the case of interstate pavement in poor condition, it went up by 0.3%. And in the case of non-interstate pavement, it went down by 0.1%. So I would consider that fairly consistent. Non-interstate NHS pavement in good condition decreased, but we're still hovering within striking distance of meeting that target. DOT has funds committed in its work program to maintain good pavement and bridge condition. So we would anticipate that over the next 2 years, they'll bring that percentage up so that we're exceeding the target. There are about 730 bridges across Hillsborough County, 462 of which are in the national highway system. And so those 462 are assessed for this performance measure. 76% of the NHS bridges are in good condition or better, and 0% are in poor condition. Again, not much change. It went down slightly, but again, DOT has funds committed to maintaining bridges in good condition. So we anticipate that we're not going to slip below the threshold of 50%. Next slide, please. The third and final rule that we're discussing today is system performance. This one's a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to take a little bit more time and orient our new members to this. System performance is measured in terms of level of travel time reliability. It's very confusing, so I apologize. The federal measure for this is prescribed, so we have to just do our best to understand it, even though it's counterintuitive. And so I'm going to give you a short primer over the next few slides. Next slide, please, Rich. To begin, we have to understand travel time reliability, which is abbreviated as TTR. TTR is measured, or it's to be considered as dependability or consistency of your travel time on a daily basis across different times of day. So one way to understand this is that if you have a commute that takes you 20 minutes on most days, some days it could take you as little as 15 minutes. Some days it could take you as much as 25. But overall, it's fairly consistent that you're going to be traveling approximately 20 minutes to work. However, a poor reliability would mean that if your commute is 20 minutes, some days you can get there in 5 minutes. Some days it could take an hour. That would be considered pretty poor reliability. And so the goal is to make those travel times about the same each day across different times of day. Next slide, please. All right, so I explained the difference between high reliability and low reliability. This doesn't mean that congestion doesn't exist. It just means that the congestion is fairly consistent on a daily basis. We know that if you live in one part of the county and work in the other part of the county, you're gonna be sitting in traffic. But the goal is to not have you sit in traffic for, an hour more than what you expect on a daily basis. Low reliability is primarily a function of non-recurring congestion. Again, we've just assumed that there is going to be some level of congestion, but the things that really have an impact on reliability are bottlenecks, incidents like crashes, vehicle breakdowns, poor weather, road construction, natural hazards, things like that have a more significant impact on reliability. Next slide, please. In 2018, the Hillsborough MPO agreed to support the statewide targets for level of travel time reliability, and they're shown on the bottom of this slide. On the interstate system, the goal is to have level of travel time reliability be less than 1.5, 75% of the time or more. That means if your commute is 20 minutes, that it should be no more than 30 minutes, 75% of the time. The goal for the interstate national highway system for trucks is measured slightly differently. The performance metric that they use is truck travel time reliability, and this is an index. The goal is to keep that index value below 2. A 2 would mean that on the worst travel days, a 20-minute drive should take no more than 40 minutes. If it's 41, it's exceeding that TTR value of 2. And the third and final target is non-interstate LOTTR. The goal is to have that be less than 1.5, 50% of the time. Next slide, please. In 2018, when the MPO established these targets, we were not meeting the target for LOTTR. Over the past 2 years, we have increased our reliability by 4%. We're now just barely meeting that target. For the non-interstate level of travel time reliability, we were exceeding that target in 2018. We've brought that up almost, or actually more than 20%. So we're doing a pretty good job on the non-interstate system. And truck travel time reliability, the index value in 2018 was 2.08. We were not meeting the target. We've brought that down almost 20. And so we are meeting that goal at this moment. Next slide, please. We're just about to get started. We're about to host a kickoff meeting for a Smart Cities plan. This plan is something that I think we're all looking forward to. It's to evaluate specific strategies and technologies that can help improve reliability and reduce congestion. There are actually a lot of strategies that can be put in place to address low reliability. These range from demand management strategies like encouraging carpooling, using transit, walking, biking. More oriented toward technology, we can do things like integrated corridor management, where we push out messages to the public, letting them know that a road is highly congested and to take a different path. And if we continue escalating that level of improvement, it can get as far as developing new structures, like adding a lane. So the Smart Cities Plan is going to look at what technologies are available now and emerging that can help us address this problem without investing a ton of money laying down new pavement, because that's not the goal. Next slide, please. All right, so I hope I gave you all a pretty good overview of where we stand. Again, in 2 years, we're going to have the opportunity to revise these targets. As of today, it looks like we are either exceeding all the targets that we set, and for the ones that we're not meeting, we're on the cusp, we're within striking range. So we don't have an opportunity to adjust the targets today, but there is an action for the committee that's being requested. One of the transit asset management targets was incorrectly produced in 2018. We reported that as 81% of equipment assets not in a state of good repair. We took the inverse. That number should actually be 19%. So we're asking your approval to make that change. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wong. That was a good presentation, a lot of interesting information in there. Are there questions from the committee members?
I have a question.
Christina Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Johnny, great presentation. Thank you very much. I'm wondering, there was a news report broadcast yesterday that gave credit for a new complete street happening on Florida-Nebraska to the All for Transportation funding that is amassing. So I was confused by that. There haven't been any funds released, have there? I mean, a lot hangs in the balance for these metrics you just shared with us in terms of what kind of revenue flow could come from that for HART.
I haven't been briefed by any of the agencies about funds being released to invest in projects. As far as I know, and take my word with a grain of salt, because I may not be the person with the most up-to-date information, I thought that all the agencies were just allowing that money to accumulate. Unless something happened behind the scenes that I'm unaware of, I can't say that I trust that. I would question the accuracy of the reporting, perhaps.
Yeah, I think I kind of am questioning that too, but I just wanted to check with you if you knew more. Thank you very much.
Mr. Fernandez, can you shed any light on that question?
Well, maybe a pinpoint of light, Christine. I did see that report, and I think that was a simple matter of the reporter getting out over her skis in terms of how she defined the effort being made. That there aren't any monies that have been released. I can tell you that from my position on the IOC. It is all being sequestered at present. I think what she meant to say, and maybe didn't do it very artfully, was that money has been earmarked for expenditure if and when they ever see it. And the planning that's taking place, and Cal Hardy over at the city is the one that's actually the project manager on the Florida-Nebraska project. If that money becomes available, they already have it identified for use. If it doesn't become available, we may never see those changes, or at least not at the level that Florida-Nebraska is now earmarked for. But I thank you for bringing that up. I had meant to mention that too, and I forgot.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the report?
I have a question. This is Vivian Handy.
Yes, Vivian, go ahead.
Please bear with me. It's kind of a great information, but a lot to digest. But what rings with me is I'm going to get the term wrong, the inconsistent travel time. For example, from Waimama to downtown in the morning, it can be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 45 minutes. So I find how that's going to be addressed rather interesting, and wondering what are the criteria that are looked at. I mean, surely we can look to my pet subject, urban sprawl, and expanding development prior to the roads being up to snuff. But how does that issue fit into what's being the criteria and the targets that are being discussed here?
As far as what's being done on some of the county roads now, the elements in the toolbox that are available to the planners and the engineers are limited by fund availability. So for now, we're all looking for low-cost ways of improving reliability, and that could be things like traffic signal retiming, encouraging transit use. Making more significant changes requires laying down infrastructure, deploying technologies that are actually fixed in the ground. There are a ton of roads across the county, not just in the county's jurisdiction, but owned by the city of Tampa and DOT that are not performing well. It's just a matter of getting them on the priority list for one reason or another. There are lots of county roads that have a level of travel time reliability near 2. I can't speak to Waimama specifically, but I'll say in general, we're meeting with the county staff because they're about to update their comp plan, and we're working with them to identify better ways of measuring congestion. The measure that they typically look at, or traditionally look at, I should say, is level of service. And we don't think that that's locally appropriate because most of our roads are failing already. It makes it very difficult to distinguish a bad road, which is failing, from a terrible road, which is also failing. You know, the scale just doesn't match the problems that we're seeing. So we're going to be working with them to introduce travel time reliability and potentially a host of other performance measures so that we can prioritize these roads a little bit better.
Okay, thanks. So what I'm hearing is that you share the information with the commission, the planning commission, and the board, but there's not a whole lot that can be done based on funding limitations and what solutions are available.
I won't speak specifically to the county's capital improvements program. All I can say is that the real challenge is prioritizing which roads need to be addressed first. I think the vast majority of high volume roads need some sort of treatment. And of course, the challenge is just going to be allocating funds appropriately so that we can make a dent.
Okay, but nobody steps up and says, stop building all this urban sprawl, and because the roads are never going to keep up. It seems like a no-brainer, you know?
I understand the frustration, believe me. Yeah, unfortunately, we can't, at least at the MPO side, we can't dictate what happens with land use in the county. And so even if, you know, maybe we don't agree with the development pattern, we're a little bit limited. All we can do is show the performance measures and predict the impact on traffic, but those decisions are oftentimes out of our hands.
Sure, I understand, and I certainly appreciate that. I'm sure we all feel that frustration. So essentially, you report the situation, and then they sort of do with it what they will.
With better data, we can prepare a more compelling case. I mean, if we were able to invest in predictive analytics, we would be able to demonstrate declaratively the magnitude of the impacts that can be expected. And so that's really the best we can do, is just continue to share our data and explain what the impacts will be. But that's no guarantee that it will affect decision making.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Let me comment that we're getting some background interference. Someone on the call has another source of audio that's ongoing. Sounds like another conversation. You could check your area and maybe mute that, or possibly tone it down. Any other questions of Dr. Young?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, this is Hoyt Prendel.
Hoyt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wong, appreciate the presentation. I guess one of the concerns I have is when we're providing the data on this, is the data available in such a way to kind of distinguish between the rush hour times and the non-rush hour times? Because one of my concerns, as I understand the way that these metrics work, is that it's analyzing the road across the entirety of its usage and times, and to me that allows peak travel times to skew whether there's a need to widen a particular road or freeway. For example, I think about 275 as a prime example of this. Throughout the urban core, the speed limit's 55, of course, but you can regularly drive through from Bears to West Shore at 70 miles an hour with maybe a slowdown at the curve at Malfunction Junction outside of peak travel times. But my concern with some of these metrics are that if the peak travel times are skew the data, that perhaps we're widening roads we don't need to widen strictly because we're trying to fix what is essentially a problem with peak travel times. And I wonder if that's kind of a little bit of cat and mouse, in the sense that I don't know that you're ever going to fully fix the peak travel times on any road or freeway, because like anything else with induced demand, if people find it's easier to go home at 5 o'clock, they'll start driving again. Or like what's happened with the Howard Franklin historically, is that a good segment of people will just completely avoid the road from 3 to 6 p.m. and try to go at another time if they can. And so I was wondering if you could just speak to that for a second.
I think you recapped it pretty eloquently, if I must say. There's obviously benefits and limitations to picking any period of time during the day. But by establishing the range from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., they're including both peaks as well as kind of like the off peak during the day. If we were to only look at what's going on during the AM and PM peak, it might demonstrate that we have high reliability, because most days of the week, the congestion is very, very bad, and it's, expected. The more interesting data points occur at the fringes of the peaks, like right around 10 a.m. in the morning, when rush hour is starting to die down a little bit. That really gives us the better indication of what's going on in the network. Because if you look at, just AM and PM peak, you would assume that you have terrible traffic. If you only look at the middle of the day, you would assume you have very little traffic. And so those kind of like in-between periods are what are most revealing to us. But we have to balance, or in order to normalize the statistic for all roads, we look at the same range. And so if they're all performing poorly, that still allows us to kind of like compare them against one another, if that makes sense. I hope I'm answering your question correctly.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, and I apologize, I'm not communicating this clearly. To me, for example, if a road works perfectly fine, you can travel at whatever the speed limit is, or the desired speed, so to speak, for every hour of the day outside of rush hour. Is that road really failing, and does this metric capture that? Because as I understand it, if the fact that it's congested at rush hour may bring down the overall performance of the road that otherwise outside of rush hour may perform just fine. And so that's what I was trying to, do we at least give the decision makers the data that says, okay, it specifically performs this way at rush hour, it specifically performs this way during non-peak hours, and this is what it averages out to be. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, so the way that that's handled is by, again, like collecting statistics across both peak and off-peak. That becomes the denominator when we're looking at the actual reliability metric. So we're not comparing it to free flow speed. You know, we're not comparing reliability to periods in the night where you can just zoom down the interstate. By including periods of off-peak in the denominator, we're kind of like normalizing that. So you'll see when you look at the interstate, portions of I-275 aren't performing terribly. And so they're not, the entire interstate isn't prioritized for treatments based on just travel time reliability. In fact, some of the worst performing roads are parallel roads that are on the local street network. I think Chris Vila mentioned that in his comments earlier. The interstates, aside from the portions that run right through the urban core, are in general performing pretty well.
One other question that I was thinking about, which has just left me. Oh, yes. So when you were talking about the improvement in the, not the freeways, but the arterial roads from 2018 to 2020, I think there was it increased from 59% to 81%. I apologize if I missed this, but have we determined a cause and effect for that increase in reliability?
Very difficult to pinpoint. I don't feel educated enough to give you an answer. If you'd like, I can speak with DOT staff and ask them exactly what treatments they implemented and what the rationale was behind it. I would be hesitant to give you an answer because I'm sure that I'm wrong.
That's fine. I understand. I guess it would be helpful for me to know, because to me that's quite a drastic increase in reliability. And so I would like to know, was that because of widening? Was it because of, say, road diets, you know, taking 4-lane roads without the center turn lane and providing a center turn lane that might increase the reliability of the flow? Was it, you know, traffic signal improvements that make certain intersections flow a little better? I would be curious to know that information to more inform me on how I evaluate those metrics.
If it's okay, I'd like to speak with DOT staff sometime in the future and report back to you to answer that question. I can't give you any info right now.
Okay, that's fine. Appreciate your responses, and I'll yield the floor back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Thank you, Hart. Maybe we can have that information for our November meeting. Any other questions regarding the report? Mr. Fernandez, did you have a question?
Chair, I do. At least I guess the question, maybe it's a comment.
Okay.
With reference to the comments made by Chris Vela at the top of the meeting, Chris has historically shown up at these meetings with some very well thought out comments. Today, I don't think was any different. Unfortunately, while he was speaking, my note-taking ability was a little compromised. I didn't take down every word he said, but he did have some recommendations, or at least suggestions for recommendations that we could make to the big board, perhaps out of this meeting or out of some future meeting. So unless somebody documented what he had to say during comments, I just wanted to put a pin in the meeting to a degree to say that at a future date, either maybe not next month since we have the workshop, but in November, I'd like to come back to revisit what Chris had to say, and perhaps we'd be in a position at that point to tailor some recommendations around his thoughts. Johnny, with that in mind, you were probably listening during those comments. I know you just referenced them. Was there anything in particular that Chris said that rung true to you, something that we might even be able to pick up and run with today by way of recommendation?
I don't know if it would be fleshed out enough to generate a recommendation, but I I agree with him that the lack of consistent revenue stream for bus replacements is a real problem. And that's been iterated to me by HART staff, especially the new transit asset manager. The heavy maintenance facility is generating a real problem for them because, as I mentioned, they're trying to prepare for electric vehicle deployment, and having water on the floor of the facility is a real hazard. At the same time, humidity, well, the water on the floor in the facility turns into humidity. That humidity, I've been told, is responsible for rotting some of the plywood floorboards on these buses. So many of them are deteriorating faster than anticipated under normal circumstances, i.e. a dry facility. That was one of the primary issues that was conveyed to me each time I spoke with HART staff in preparing for this report. I don't know if there's a motion or a recommendation nestled in there somewhere, but I think that that's a problem that we should really keep our eye on.
Thank you, Rick and Dr. Wong. I don't think there is a motion quite ready for presentation, but I would like to ask that we schedule this item for our November meeting, and maybe Dr. Wong, you can give us an update with regard to where some of the items with HART particularly stand. It seems to me that HART is relying very heavily on the community investment tax, and it would be interesting to know what their plan B is regard to capital funding, because between capital expenditures and operating revenues, HART is significantly struggling, and it'd be good to have an update on that. Is that something you could bring back to our November meeting?
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to that, or perhaps invite the HART TAM program manager. He's very knowledgeable, and I think that his experience would extend to this particular topic.
Good. We would welcome either type presentation. Thank you. This is an action item. We have an item recommended before us to correct a recommendation in the targets. Is there a motion to approve the recommendation?
So moved. Ms. Fernandez.
Mr. Fernandez moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Who is
I'll
the second?
Yep.
Who made the second?
Stephen Hall again. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote. Cheryl, if you would call the roll for the motion to approve the recommendation.
Rick Fernandez,
Yes.
Hoyt Prindle,
Yes.
David Bailey,
Yes.
Vivian Handy,
Yes.
Stephen Hollenkamp,
Yes.
Nicole Rice, Bill Roberts,
Yes.
Ed Merzitsky,
Yes.
Jeff Lucas,
Yes.
Cliff Reese,
Yes.
Lou Prida,
Yes.
Camilo Soto,
Yes.
Terrence Trott,
Yes.
Amy Espinoza,
Yes.
Rick Richmond.
Yes.
Motion passes 14-0.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, for the presentation. Christine, did you have a question?
Just I want to make a note that I was not called upon to vote, but I do vote in favor of the motion. So.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Cheryl, will
thanks.
you make that addition?
15-0. Sorry, Ms.
Thank
Acosta.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is the TIP program amendment. That item has been deferred at the request of the presenter. It will come back to us, I suspect, at our November meeting. That moves us into our status reports. The first of the status report is the HART service changes for 2021. And we'll move into that presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development from HARC. Can everyone hear me okay?
I think we can hear you okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. So HART is currently looking at making some changes as we have to take into consideration if we do not end up getting the surtaxes, then we are going to have to look at making a backup plan, and I'm going to give you a outline of what the service changes would look like. I'm not sure what this presentation is here that we're seeing. There we go. Next slide, please. Can I control the slides, or will you?
I'll advance the slides, Chris, if you just tell me when to advance.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of outline of the background, our overall modifications plans, and then our next steps, and I'll take some questions. Next slide, please. As far as the background, so we really evaluated the system from a holistic level in order to be both not only fiscally responsible under our current budgetary strengths, but constraints, but also looking at it from a standpoint where we're balancing the focus with our desire to serve the needs of the community to be most effective and efficient as possible. So if we are looking at service changes, we have to be mindful of the fact that we are fiscally constrained, but we also don't want to make any changes that we might have to make negative changes, then we want to make those have the least amount of impact on the public as possible. So next slide, please. You can advance 2 slides. I'll go through the I will go through the proposed changes that we have for January of 2021 that we are bringing out to the public. We'll start in the university area. Route 5 would shift to serve USF on Spectrum Boulevard between Bruce B. Downs and McKinley Drive. It would no longer serve Fowler Avenue. The USF Bull Runner does serve USF, but only for students and isn't available for other on-campus staff. So this would bring back service for residents to be able to get to jobs on campus. Route 48 would also shift to serve USF on Holly Drive between UATC and 50th Street. And along Route 48, and although Route 48 would no longer serve Fletcher Avenue, Route 6 already does serve those stops on Fletcher and can be used as the alternative. Next slide, please. Still looking at Route 48, as a response to community requests, we plan to extend the Route 48 in order to restore service north of Fletcher Avenue. And we'd be able to serve UACDC, the university area CDC, and the popular senior residents in that area, and the popular student residence campus lodge as well. The first option, and there's a few options that we're also offering the public to look at. And the first one is a one-way loop on 22nd Street in Livingston to Sinclair Hills and on to Florida Avenue back to UATC. The second option, the second option provides bus service in both directions on 22nd Street with a one-way loop on Livingston, Sinclair Hills, and Bears Avenue. The third option is a one-way loop on 22nd Street in Livingston to Sinclair Hills, but then onto Nebraska Avenue to UATC. So we have a few different options here, and primarily that would really bring back some service that was lost during the Mission Max cuts that we've heard so much feedback from the public on. Next slide, please. Continuing in the university area, we'd like to improve connections and travel times going to West Shore and to help those traveling north to Fletcher.
So we're proposing that part of Route 42 would go into Route 45 so that the Route 45 would be extended north of Bush Boulevard and end at UATC via 15th Street. That would create a one-seat trip from UATC to West Shore. And this would also mean that these routes would no longer serve Yukon Transfer Center, which decreases the duration of the trip. Transfers between Route 16 would happen at North Boulevard and Waters, and this would also make the Route 42 a complete one-way loop from UATC to Nebraska, Skipper Bears, and Bruce B. Downs. This would reduce travel time for those trying to get from UATC to north of Fletcher. Overall, these changes would help improve reliability so that these routes can be better on time. Next slide, please. Getting from the university area to Northdale, Hartflex Northdale is being proposed to be removed. However, we are also proposing to have the Route 33 cover the fixed route of the Northdale Flex. So essentially, we would be replacing the Flex by extending the Route 33 up Northdale Mabry to the to the St. Joseph's Hospital area via Dale Mabry. We'd also add a new one-way loop from Van Dyke to Calusa Trace Boulevard on this route, and this would create a one-seat trip from University area to Northdale without a transfer. The frequency of Route 33 would also decrease from 30 minutes to 60 minutes on weekdays. So that would be the trade-off for the Route 33. Next slide, please. Moving into the getting from the university area to New Tampa, the Route 275 LX would be shortened to run between UATC and the Wiregrass Park and Ride, so it would no longer serve between UATC and downtown and the airport. We'd also rename it to the Route 22 LX. So for getting between UATC and MTC, routes 1 and 400 would then become your quickest alternatives. And for getting between MTC and the airport, Route 30 and the new Route 10, which I'll talk about later on Cypress Street, would be the best alternatives. And for accessing Fowler Avenue, riders can still use routes 9, 12, 45, and 400. I think it's worthy of noting here and taking into consideration and cutting off the 275 LX, we do see over 50% of the ridership occurs between Wiregrass and UATC on the 275 LX currently. Next slide, please. So moving into the a little further south in the West Tampa area, one of the express routes we're proposing to remove is the Route 60 LX. So for traveling between Brandon and downtown, routes 25 LX and 360 LX will become the alternatives. And then for traveling between downtown and West Shore, we are proposing a new route from Marion Transit Center to TIA via Cypress Street. So both the Route 60 LX and 275 LX, and taking into consideration and removing both the 60 LX and 275 LX from this area. So often these routes 60 and 275 are put on detour because of traffic on 275 between downtown and West Shore. We end up putting it on the detour on Cypress Avenue. So we're essentially making that detour permanent. It also is bringing back a route that was used prior to Mission Max that we heard a lot of people wishing to bring back that Cypress corridor. So I think that's a win-win for everybody in making those changes. Next slide. Sticking in the West Tampa area, Route 7 would shift the restore service to Main Street between North Boulevard and Howard, Armenia. So it would no longer serve all of North Boulevard. And this would bring the route to serve many of the businesses along historic Main Street of West Tampa, and would serve the West River redevelopment, which includes a significant amount of affordable housing that's coming online here in the near future. And then really we foresee this shift to Main Street allowing us to meet a much greater demand. As we know, North Boulevard there between downtown and MLK, there's while it is a lot of residential, we see a lot more opportunity to gain a significant amount of ridership by putting the Route 7 on the Howard Armenia. Next slide, please. Looking at the Ybor and downtown area, we propose to shift the Route 8 to serve 4th Avenue from 21st Street to Channelside Drive. It would no longer serve all of 7th Avenue. As we all know, 7th Avenue is frequently put on detour because of events and construction. I think that one's relatively self-explanatory. We wouldn't run it down. We wouldn't run it down all the way down to down into the Water Street area, down on Channelside Drive. We bring it over on Kennedy and Jackson, a more direct route to MTC, and that would, and the frequency on the streetcar really gives people a good option there for people to transfer from the Route 8 to the streetcar as a good option to be able to get down into the Water Street area. We're also hoping to later this year have online a circulator service in downtown Tampa. That's not something that's completely finalized yet, but that'll improve opportunities for people to get down into that Water Street area. Next slide, please. Looking at town and country area, we would restore the previous Route 30 and 35 that was discontinued. The Route 30 used to run between Marion and the Northwest Transit Center through the airport. That was cut in half at Mission Max, and we really saw a dramatic decrease in that ridership between Northwest Transit Center and the airport. So we would just bring that back to what it was prior to Mission Max. We've gotten a lot of feedback from people that would like to see that come back, and our expectations are that we would see the ridership grow again on that route. Next slide. In the Brandon area, Route 38 would be extended south of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard to Westfield Brandon Mall via Parsons and Oakfield Drive. One of the flex routes we're proposing to remove is the Hart Flex in Brandon. So this extension of Route 38 would serve those important destinations along Oakfield Drive, such as the Brandon Hospital, and also provide an additional option for connecting between East Tampa and Brandon. Next slide, please. Looking in the South Tampa area, the Route 14 would be extended south of Swan Avenue to Britton Plaza. This would create another connection within the entire Hart network to other routes in the system by bringing it to Britton Plaza. There are currently two options we're considering. The first option is to go on McDill and Euclid Avenue. The second option would be to go on Bay to Bay and Dale Mabry. And you'll be able to select your preferred option on our survey that we'll provide after this. I'll tell you a little bit more about after this presentation here. So next slide. So some of the other changes that we're looking at here, ultimately we're looking at taking all of our 15-minute routes and reducing them to 20-minute frequencies. That really allows us to make a significant changes that are needed within the constraints that we're dealing with that are necessary for this service change, while minimizing the impact as much as possible to the network as a whole. As you can see, we'd be looking at reducing some trips on the 24LX from 5 to 3 in the AM and PM. We'd be looking to remove the 20LX, which is the Lutz and Pasco Express that comes Down Florida Avenue, the South County Shopper, the 75LX would be removed. And we'd be looking to remove the other 3 Heart Flex. So really, all in all, we'd be looking to remove all the Heart Flex services throughout the county. Next slide, please. So this is sort of a summary of the proposed changes and really adjusting a number of routes, looking to add some service where possible, where it makes sense. Excuse me, my screen just went in the timeout. 1 second here. Okay. And then we have a number of reduced frequencies that we would be looking at, and then a number of removed services for the overall proposed changes. The next slide will also give you some continued highlights of the plan that are consistent with that slide that you just saw there. I think what's important here to note is that most impacted stops will still be served or have fixed route service within a quarter mile. Although it's not ideal for everybody, we did our best to minimize that impact. It's a quarter mile to be able to get to a transit stop is for the most part a standard is acceptability to be able to access transit. So we did our best where if we were to remove service completely and there was no other option, they still were able to they still had some option for public transit within a quarter mile. Next slide. This is probably hard to see, but hopefully we can make this available for you all so you can take a more detailed look at it. This would be the overall modifications plan of the proposed weekday service map, and we have color coded it by frequency. So you can take a little deeper dive, look into that. You may be able to zoom into it on here. I'm not exactly sure. But what's important in this map is to be able to see the different colors there, that you can sort of understand the frequency of the network. As expected, you would see the most frequent services continue to be focused in the core areas of Tampa. There are a couple that are still yet to be determined as we're working out exactly what those routes are going to be exactly how they're going to look, and that's primarily in out in East County and South County. Next slide, please. So we start looking at numbers here. Ultimately, we're looking at a total reduction of about 10% of the service hours, and we're looking at a total annual savings of $4.3 million. Since we're proposing this to start in the second quarter of next year, we won't realize the full annual savings, but we will project it to save about $3.2 million in fiscal year 21. And about $2.2 million of that will be directly related to operator savings, not in operator cuts, but allowing us to, right now, one of our biggest expense in any transit agency obviously is operations, but overtime. It's such a huge expense for us, and part of this plan allows us to reduce the average weekly hours that our drivers will be driving. So it's not about cutting the number of operators that we have, but we would bring their average weekly hours much closer to a 40-hour work weeks, which would drastically reduce our overtime payout on an annual basis. And that's reflected in that $2 million savings. Next slide here about the schedule of this modifications plan. We're looking, currently we're in the public outreach phase. We've done a couple town halls. This week we are out talking to people at the transit centers. People are out there right now as we speak at UATC, MTC, UConn. We're bringing back all the comments and feedback to the board for a public hearing in October, and and also with final recommendations in October. We'll bring it to our October committees and then present to the board for final approval in November. And our expectation is for a January launch of this service dates, of these service changes, excuse me. So next slide here. That's really the same, the schedule more in words here. There is and I apologize, this is not on here, and I think it would be good for me if maybe I can send this out to Rich Clarendon and Sarah McKinley. I will get them our survey link. If y'all might want to just write it down now, it's called heartserviceinput.org. And that is a website you can go to where allows you to participate in the survey. It's double checking that it's .com or .org.
It's .com. It's actually, Chris, it's actually it's part of the agenda package that went out to the CAC members. So
good. Excellent.
It's in your packet, but it is serviceinput.com.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And that's all I have on the update. A lot of information, obviously. We're in a very challenging time. We could find out tomorrow that we get the money. We could also find out tomorrow that we definitely aren't getting the money. Our goal of this exercise is to ensure that we have a backup plan to move forward that maintains the financial stability of our agency while maintaining as much service as possible for the people, and that's really our goal of all of this. So I'd be happy to take any questions, comments.
Good, thank you, Chris. Very good presentation, a lot of good detail in there. I'm sure we'll have some questions. Let me just clarify, the status is that this is a plan that Hart will implement if there is no new funding available from any source. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Ed, you have a question?
Yeah, actually two questions. One is, hey, Chris, how you doing?
Good, Ed.
One is the idea of reducing overtime. Is there any, possibility to hire additional drivers? And then the second question is there any consideration of raising the millage rate?
I do know that the millage rate discussion is very likely to come up in the budget hearing, the budget discussion in the board meeting on Monday. I don't know, obviously that's up to our board. We do have room for, at the board's discretion, they can always raise it. We are $0.25 mil lower than PSTA. And I think if we were to come up to PSTA's level, I believe I've heard that we would get an additional, I believe I heard an additional potentially like $20 million a year. It's a big number. It might be 12, but I think it might be, I think it could be 20. And as far as hiring more drivers, if we're cutting service, it looks like right now we are able to, what we've projected out with our current staff, if we were to maintain our current staff level with attrition, that we would be able to get that overtime down to a level that meets our financial goal. So,
Okay,
but yes,
thanks.
if we have to, one of the solutions is obviously you're right, is to hire more people so you don't need overtime. But that's that's always fun to hear the unions take on that. But we do have contracts in place that allow us to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Other questions?
Mr.
Rick
Chair.
Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, hey, good morning. Thank you for your report. I'm always trying to connect the dots between these proposed actions and people on the ground. In particular, reference this question, communities of concern as have been identified by the MPO to us in some of our meetings in the recent past. Are there any efforts made, any part of the analysis that goes into the impact of these service reductions on communities of concern that have been identified by our leadership throughout the county?
Yes. So whenever we make changes of this significance, so we have the transit agency has a threshold, and I believe if we identify that any change has a potential disparate impact on a low-income or minority community of 25% or more, whether it be based on 25% or more of the route or 25% or more of the ridership of that route that goes through that community is impacted by a change that you make, that you have to complete a Title VI analysis. And so that is something that is being done as part of this.
I'm sorry, there is a Title VI analysis taking place commensurate with this, or consistent
Yes.
with this?
Yes, sir. That would be a federal requirement. Yes.
Okay. And are there any particular areas of the city or county that are particularly impacted as you understand these changes now?
Well, East Tampa, West Tampa. I mean, there's really no surprises in where those impacted areas are. If we're moving or changing frequencies of service or looking to remove routes from any of those areas, then yeah, they're certainly considered. But I mean, if you look at the changes we're making, we're really not removing a whole lot of actual geographic coverage. It's more about reducing service from a frequency standpoint. And if we're with the exception of the flex routes, but we have found ways to serve most of those flex route areas with other routes. The 33 is an example there in how we still are able to, even though we're reducing it to 60 minutes, we're still taking it up Dale Mabry where the Northdale flex previously was. So, but regardless, we do still have to do an analysis of how it impacts low-income and minority communities based on, what I believe how the analysis goes is that they take income of census block areas, and anything that's 150% of low income or lower, we identify that as a low income. And then there's also a threshold of minority populations within each census block. So we identify those as minority and low income areas. And then if a route travels if 25% or more of a route travels through minority and low income census blocks, then we identify that as having made a disparate impact, and we document we are trying to mitigate the impact on them. It doesn't mean we can't make the changes. It just means we have to identify it and document how we are at least attempting to mitigate it. Does that make sense? Am I answering your question?
I think you're making the best effort you can. I appreciate that. I'll follow up.
If I'm not clear. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments on the report?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I see Nikki Rice has her hand raised.
Okay, Nikki, you're recognized.
I think you have to unmute yourself, Nikki.
She's not on my screen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chair and Chris. Thank you for the presentation. I actually have already taken that quiz. Yeah, I'll call it a quiz because it felt like it online. And I'd like to speak to it at this point, if possible. As somebody who's very familiar with transit, I did this along with Mauricio Rojas and a bunch of people. I could not understand the questions being asked of me. The data charts in it are so complex, and it essentially gives you options of either or, A or B. The entire thing took me over an hour because I had to insert huge paragraphs of swaths of information that were alternatives that were on the table in relation to other funding or the possible arterial BRT. And I'm just curious, like, it felt like it was designed either A, by somebody who doesn't really do a lot of public outreach data. It felt very internal. And I'm curious what the feedback has been so far and what you've received with that questionnaire. Because like I said, it took me about an hour. And there were none that I could just say yes or no. I had to put an explanation and a full paragraph under every single question asked. And in no way, shape, or form does it actually make reference to anyone reading it, the predicament that you guys or we're all in at heart, and that this is why we're having to do A, B, and C. And I'm pretty sure it's too late to do anything about that. Do you have any thoughts on it, or the success or lack of success in regards to what you're receiving back?
I have not heard anything. I very much appreciate your feedback. Did you take the survey? Is this the BRT survey you're speaking to?
No. It's the one that you're actually referring for us to do today. It was sent to me this week.
Okay, because I'm looking at it right now.
On the heart routes.
Yes, ma'am. And the first 5 questions are radio buttons. There's no paragraphs. There's no.
Right, and there's other ones as you go through it. I had to pull up my messenger because I actually just had to screenshot it. So I was like, what on earth is this?
Right. So
it was the Heart 2021 Pro Service regional survey. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And
okay.
I mean, I see where it offers you the opportunity to put comments in, but they're all radio button questions. I don't see any.
Many of them say, please explain. So it'll be like, yes, I want option A or option B, or then you can explain on the other ones. And we had a very long conversation back and forth. And I actually put, reading and taking the survey, I felt slightly manipulated and cannot imagine any non-active individuals taking this, even active bus riders without extreme transit knowledge, creating any data that is actually effective in determining these routes. It feels as if it's being used as an outreach tool. However, it just looks as an attempt to collect data. I would encourage, and obviously I'm assuming you didn't create this survey. I would
We did-
encourage everyone to take said survey because it is probably one of the hardest to understand looking at the way the graphings are done on it. It's like, this is your option or this is your option. And the map and the data is so hard to read, especially for people who may not be on a laptop. It's really, really not user friendly.
I think this is great feedback. The very first paragraph states the goal of these changes is to keep as much service as possible while considering limited funding due to future uncertainties of the voter-approved station surtax. So that's why we are making these service changes. Maybe it's a discussion. We'd be happy to talk with you more offline.
Yeah, I actually put all my information into the survey, and you'll know it's mine because I wrote you a book. But I will say the questions were very, very hard. Where I just was curious, like, how much outreach have you received? And if I took that and just were any general person in the public, I would not understand the questions being asked based on the graphings and the way that the actual information's laid out. And that's my personal opinion. Maybe other people find it to be very user friendly and very intuitive, but it just did not seem. It felt like it was designed by engineers.
Okay.
It's not there.
Okay, Nikki, I think this is a case where maybe you and Chris can talk offline and discuss the questionnaire.
Yeah, Chris, I would love to, if you have an opportunity at some point, to reach out to me. But I do encourage everyone to take that because there's some routes that are going to be impacted that are really important to people for commuting. Thank you.
I'm sure they'll get a lot of valuable feedback. Christina Costa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nikki, for your feedback. And Chris, for your presentation. I would like to be in on that call. I have some other feedback I'd like to share with you, Chris, about the BRT survey without taking the committee's time, but it's similar to the experience Nikki has had. So I'd like to share that with you if you could add me to your plan to talk. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Christine. Other comments? I don't see other hands raised. Chris, let me ask you this question. If this plan is in the works to be implemented in 2021, if there is funding made available through the recent sales tax initiative, will this plan be scrapped and something else put in its place, or what's plan A?
So if funding does go through, yes, this would be scrapped and we would move forward with the first year of the IOC plan that the IOC has already adopted back in 2019.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure our committee
2019,
understood.
2020. Yes, sir.
Pardon me?
And
I just wanted to be sure the committee understood this is a plan. If no new funding is that there is a plan if the funding from some source comes to pass. Any other questions? If not, Chris, thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm looking through the attendees. Nikki, I don't see your last name. What's your last name? I apologize, so I know who to expect.
Rice, R-I-C-E, but I have no idea what your contact information is. Mine's actually Nicole Rice. It's Nicole Rice, 1976 at Gmail. And did you get that, Chris?
Yes, ma'am, I did. Thank you. I'll be reaching out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other comments? Rick Richmond, you recognize.
Thank you, Bill. And just a quick comment because we have gone a little long here, but I want to thank Ed, and I don't know, mentioning the millage rate, HART does have the ability to raise funding through increased millage through the ad valorem tax. So I just want to make the committee aware of that. 58% of their operating budget is collected from the ad valorem taxes. And that millage rate has gone unchanged since 2013. So if we're all serious about transit and we want to fund transit, we need to fund it as a community, and they have a funding source. They need to, HART has always been challenged by a budget for a long, long time, but refused to increase the millage rate. So that's my comment, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I think I think this committee is very much aware, Chris, of the various dilemmas that HART faces. On the one hand, operating expenses do chew up a significant amount of money, and grants and other sources may be available or may not be available at any given time for capital improvements. But I think some of the improvements that we heard suggested in Dr. bear close attention. Any other comments or questions on the presentation?
Yeah, Lou Preet, I'd like to make one comment. And backing up Mr.
Yes, Lou,
Richmond,
go ahead.
I represent business interests, but I will tell you that you have to spend money to make money. And increasing the ad valorem tax and doing the investments that we need to make in order to pay off in our community are significant, and it will pay off long-term value by having a community with great transit. So as a business rep, I fully support the investment that needs to be made, and everyone in the community needs to step up to make it. It's part of business. It's part of my view is that every community competes. There's a marketplace, and you have to, if you're a business, your community, to compete in that marketplace, you have to make investments, and transit is just so important. The bus system, rail, everything really needs to come together. So that's the comment that I'll make. That I'm not. Some people might typically think business would be against higher taxes. It's not higher taxes. It's making an investment in our community. It's just so important. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments, and I hope Chris appreciates them as well. This committee tends to be very much in favor of anything that will improve transit and any transportation in our area. Business and the economic vitality suffer when our transit and transportation system suffers as well. If there are no further comments, we will move on in our agenda. Chris, thank you for bringing that to our attention, and a very good report.
Thank you all very much for having me, and I look forward to talking to some of y'all here about our survey. Appreciate it very much.
We welcome you back anytime. The next item on our agenda is unfinished and new business. The first item is the follow-up from our August 12th meeting. Rich Clarendon, did you have some comments you wanted to make under this topic?
Yes, I sure did. Let me just start the subtitles again. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties here. Okay. Here we go. Bear with me just a minute. Okay. Hope everybody can see this. So there were a number of items that were brought up at your August meeting from a number of different members. And I'd like to just go down the list if I could. Hopefully we'll get through all of them. But to start with, Terrence asked about safe routes to schools. For those who don't know, this is a program that was originally started by the feds, and the state, a number of states, including Florida, have now picked up and institutionalized as a funding source for making improvements to the bicycle and pedestrian network that would allow students to access schools without necessarily having to get into a car or ask a parent to drive them. So this is just a little graphic that explains some of the benefits and the rationale. I think the request was, what's going on locally, and we are trying to get this scheduled to have an update to talk about some specific projects in Hillsborough County and have it on your November agenda. So hopefully that'll be forthcoming. The next item, and I think this was touched on under members' interest today as well, has to do with the status of Baum Road and the new high school, Sumner High School, down in the South County area. For those of you who may not know, this is US Highway 301 running north-south. Baum Road, which is also known as County Road 672, runs east-west. And this here is the new high school that opened up this year. So I did get a report from the county project manager. There are a number of improvements that have been made and some that are in the works. They're listed here. The school markings were installed before school started, and the speed limit was reduced to 35 miles per hour. There are some improvements that are being designed now, and with the anticipation that they'd be constructed in time for the next school year, but basically to put curb and gutter along this stretch of road all the way to here, which is Ayersworth, Glen Boulevard, and Arbor Pines Drive. Sidewalks on both sides, curb and gutter. Construction scheduled for next summer, pending any right-of-way requirements. Also, US 301 in this vicinity, south of Baum Road, is being widened. Those of you who live down there know what I'm talking about. And this intersection will be improved at 672 Baum Road as part of that project. There was reference made to a project to widen Baum Road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. And that is part of our transportation improvement program as a priority. The county is seeking funding to widen Baum Road, not all the way east, but to Clement Pride Road, which is just east of this vicinity map. So it's this section of County Road 672 that the county is seeking funding for. It's pretty low on our priority list for state and federal funding, but there's nothing that would stop the county from spending its own money, assuming they have money, to make that improvement. We keep going here, and then I'll take questions. A request was also made for TBARTA agendas to see if the CAC could start receiving those as a matter of routine. That would be both for the TBARTA board as well as the TBARTA Citizens Advisory Committee meeting agendas. And the response I got when reaching out to TBARTA was that they don't really maintain a mailing list, but anybody can go online and access their agendas, off the internet at their convenience. Now I know both Bill and Rick Richmond are members of the T-BARTA CAC. Rick, did you want to address how you receive your meeting packets for the CAC?
Sure, Rich, thank you. We receive an email with the agenda packets, usually either a link or the actual packets attached. And Rich, I'll agree so as long as I sit in that capacity, that when I receive that, I can forward it to you, and then you can forward it on to the CAC members. Just also a reminder, though, that the agendas are available on the website, and as far as the CAC and all the other subcommittees and the board agenda packets. So, and their meetings are also broadcast, or they're available on YouTube. So, thanks. If you have any other questions.
Okay, thank you. And that would work for me as long as it works for everybody else.
Rich, I'm sorry to interrupt, Chair. I'd just like to make a point of clarification.
Go ahead.
I received that package as well, and I'm the one who brought this up last time. And the way that the email has sent, and perhaps it may be my personal computer system or computer skills, but I'd like to know if that comes through to you, because when you try to forward that package to others, which I have tried to do before, it's encrypted in a way where they cannot open it. So like on my end, and Rick, if you want to try it, but it's like I've tried to send it and it's completely like encrypted. So if we could just verify if that's really an option or if it's set up to be encrypted.
Okay, no, great point. I did not realize that either. So I will try that, Rich. I'll send you one and let me know. That's
because it could be me doing it on a Mac through Google or just the way it's encrypted there. But when I've tried to forward it, in no way, shape, or form can you open the actual attachments to that agenda package.
okay. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, let me keep going here. So one of the requests, I think this came from Chairman Roberts and also Vice Chair Fernandez, to sort of recap the motions made on the TIP, the most recent Transportation Improvement Program, and what happened to those. So I'm just going to go quickly through these. There was a motion to ask T-BARTA to consider multimodal connections, particularly trails. There was also a number of motions regarding priorities for new funding and moving some of the projects up on the priority list. They're listed here, the Heights mobility improvements, that's in the Tampa Heights area, the modern streetcar extension, that would be the track work that the city is seeking funding for, the modern streetcars themselves, that would be the vehicles that HART is seeking funding for, and then the interchange at Interstate 75 and Gibsonton Drive. In addition, there were motions made to remove a number of priorities and projects that are listed here. Priority 31, which was the additional lane on I-275 going north from MLK to north of Bierce Avenue. Priority 32, which was the safety and operational improvements to the downtown interchange. Projects that are listed here, one of which it would be adding express lanes on I-275 from south of Lois to east of the Hillsborough River. This is the stretch of 275 between downtown and West Shore, essentially. And then the design project to add express lanes on I-4 from the Selman connector to east of Branch Forbes Road. And then the last motion that was made related to the TIP was to support the use of the CSX corridors as a top priority. And this one is highlighted in green because that one was actually the only motion that the MPO acted on affirmatively. So they did move up the CSX corridors corridor study as a priority. Let me keep going here. This is another question that came up last month, the Laurel Street roundabout. This is a graphic, actually came from the presentation that Christina Costa mentioned that was made to City Council last week, I believe. This is a project that the city has in design this fiscal year, fiscal 21, with construction funding program from DOT 3 years out in fiscal 24. I think the question was, could we do something in the interim in the form of a pop-up project to remove the sort of the free flow right turns around this sort of traditional intersection. It's right now just a, see if I can go to full screen here. This is the way it looks presently. And I think the notion was to see if we could force traffic to make that sharp right turn and perhaps slow it down and make it a little safer for pedestrians, sort of as an interim project. And the feedback we got from the city was that that would not look like it's feasible just because of the sharp radii and the fact that you probably have traffic swinging into the opposing lane if you tried to do that. So I think they'd rather focus on just getting the permanent improvements in place as quickly as possible. Another question that came up was who was responsible for maintaining county roads that are in the city? And I'm indebted to Stephen Benson for providing this rather complicated graphic, which actually is part of your packet. So if you wanted to spend some time looking at it, you could. But essentially, what it tries to do is to break down, you know, what arterials and collector roads run through the city and who's responsible for them. The roadways that are highlighted in blue, I'll just take a couple of examples, like 40th Street here and Bayshore Boulevard. The county is basically responsible for making capital improvements on those roads, but the city has agreed, and it's actually an interlocal agreement, to take on maintenance responsibilities, you know, basically maintaining the sidewalks, the landscaping, et cetera. The other thing that the interlocal agreement says is the city is going to be responsible for maintaining traffic signals on county roads that are within the city. So you really, it's not a simple answer, and you probably need to look at not just this graphic, but also the interlocal agreement itself to really figure it out. But one of the parts of this that I think is important is, who do I contact? You see in the upper right-hand corner, that might be the simplest thing to do, is to pick up the phone and call one of these numbers if you have a question. The last request that was made was a discussion, and this was sort of brought up at the tail end of our last meeting, sort of pursuant to the resolution on racial discrimination and equity, which, by the way, the MPO adopted unanimously at their last meeting. But to see if we could prioritize funding for disenfranchised neighborhoods. I think this is something that we are all considering, especially at the staff level. I think the question the first question that I would ask the CAC to consider is, funding for what and how do we determine that? So part of our mission really, as it always has been, is to do some outreach to disenfranchised neighborhoods, sometimes called communities of concern. There's a number of names, but basically, areas that have not received the full benefit of transportation improvements and determine what their needs are. So I think that's part and parcel of our mission, and particularly as it relates to soliciting projects every year as we do for our transportation improvement program, and to prioritize some of those project requests. I think that takes me to the end of the follow-up items, and if there are questions, I'll try to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Are there questions on these follow-up items or additional comments? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Rich, has anyone raised their hand electronically?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on the amendments to the TIP that we actually I have two comments. One is on the amendments to the TIP that this committee recommended to the MPO board. The two that were of particular concern to me were the removal of sections 31 and 32 that specifically describe toll lanes. If this committee wants to ask the MPO board to revisit their endorsement of that plan, we'd certainly welcome that kind of interest. The second thing I wanted to mention was a congratulations and thank you to Hoyt Prindle for presenting our resolution on non-discrimination in transportation and transit projects. That resolution was presented by Hoyt at the MPO board meeting. It was extremely well received, received a lot of good comment, and as Rich just reported, the MPO board unanimously adopted that resolution. So I think the committee is to be congratulated on the hard work, and the subcommittee particularly, who put in the effort to get that resolution moved along. Those are my comments. Are there other committee members who have comments on Rich Clarendon's report?
Chair, this is Terrence. I have one if I could be recognized.
Yes, Terrence, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to, was there any clarification on, or I just want to see if there's clarification on what exactly the MPO said about the I-75 and Gibsonton interchange, as far as them not formally, recommending it to be moved up in priority.
I'll defer to Rich Clarendon on that one. I don't remember the specifics.
Yeah, so what we normally do is to make a report, and it's delivered by the chair. In this case, it would be Bill Roberts, on all the motions that are passed at our CAC meeting, and forwarded on to the MPO as recommendations. Sometimes the MPO will take those up, but in this case, the only recommendation that was made that actually was acted upon by the MPO board and approved was to move up the study of the CSX corridors. So to answer the question, the interchange at Gibsonton and I-75 is still on our priority list, but in the same, essentially the same position that it has been, which means that it's seeking funding, and I know the DOT is working with us to try to move that project forward, but the priority, its position on the priority list did not change.
All right, thanks, Rich. And since it's not funded and everything, is there still a potential for the design to be like a diverging diamond? Is that an option? Or I just want to make sure that that's considered potentially, because we have a chance of doing something pretty nice at that intersection that would last for years.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, Terrence. My gut tells me that there may not be the right of way that's needed, but I'd have to ask DOT.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Good question. Rich, maybe you can give us a report on what response you get back from DOT at the next meeting. Any other questions on Rich's update from our last meeting? If not, we'll move into the Plant City Transit Plan.
Yeah, I can talk to this one, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
This is a project that we've had going on, and we will be bringing it to the committee at your November meeting, I believe. But Plant City has asked the MPO's help to come up with a transit plan, sort of to reinstitute bus service in Plant City. And we're at the point now where we're seeking public input. There was a virtual open house it's actually a couple-week period that started, I believe, back at the end of August and goes through September 13th. There's a survey. The survey is open through the 13th, and we would encourage anybody interested in instituting or weighing in on what's been proposed in the way of routing and schedules and type of service to take a look at that survey. It's a pretty interesting, you actually go through a succession of screens that we call like going through rooms in a real open house as opposed to a virtual one. If I can continue, another sort of advertisement I'd like to make is Vision Zero Leadership Summit, which is scheduled for September 22nd. I believe it's at 9 a.m. The point of this is to convene a group of local officials as well as nationally recognized and state recognized experts. The particular emphasis on this one is to deal with not just design, although that's part of it, but also to look at how Vision Zero can affect new development approvals and also enforcement of driver behavior. So those are sort of the points of the Leadership Summit. And again, it's open to the public. It's actually, we're taking the time that was allocated to the MPO's policy committee and convening this as a leadership summit involving the not just the policy committee, but all of the MPO members as well as invited guests. That concludes my paid commercial advertisements. If there's questions, I'll try to answer them. But
Rich, is that Vision Zero Summit virtual or in person, or how would one sign up?
Yeah, it's virtual at this point. We had hoped to have it in person. We actually made arrangements to use the new Riverfront Center at Julian Lane Park, but I don't think that's going to happen. So at this point, it's going to be online.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Rich on his reports, these two? Okay, see, Christine, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Rich, I just want to thank you for the follow-up on the many items that you had on your list. I would like to go on the record as expressing disappointment that there's no interim solution to improve the safety of the Laurel and Carlton B. Doyle intersection. We have trail usage, we don't have any counters on our trails, but statewide trail usage where it is counted, and especially over in Pinellas County, trail usage, like along the Riverwalk, is up 150%, 200% because of COVID. So you have a very active corridor. You have a juncture on Riverwalk just, I guess it would be south of there at the Straz, that is inoperable for, a lot of people avoid that because it's actually, it's an old ADA ramp, basically, is the connector from downtown to go to Armature. So I think we have a lot of activity there, and I think closing the slip lanes is something that a lot of cities are doing in a lot of places. There's almost no vehicular traffic there right now. And so I'm very, very disappointed that a consideration of a four-way stop and closing the slip lines is not something we could do sooner rather than wait for a fabulous and gorgeous roundabout that is still years away. So I want to express myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Other comments on Rick's presentation? Okay, the next item on our agenda is the T-BARTA CAC report. Rick Richmond, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. T-BARTA, we met on August 19th. We had no action items on the agenda, but we did have just a few updates from prior meetings. One was an update on ridership that the committee had asked per segment for the regional rapid transit. And they returned back that the Wesley Chapel to Tampa would be the highest. These are forecasted riderships, obviously. The Wesley Chapel to Tampa, followed by West Shore to Tampa, and then Tampa to St. Pete. We did MCAT, which is the Manatee County Area Transit, is applying for a grant for service expansion for their Route 99, which serves US 41 from Bradenton all the way to Sarasota and stops in the airport. T-BARTA board provided a resolution of support for that, and the CAC members encouraged supporting that resolution as well. Lastly, we did have Bill's enacted the members' interest section. So I thank you, Bill, for doing that, because it did lend some lively discussion and kind of backfill our agendas going forward. Some of the topics were the Cross Bay Ferry, the Hart feasibility study for CSX, and then some legislative asks and receiving information of, how does T-BARTA secure a dedicated funding source? These are all items that, we've requested the T-BARTA staff to come before us, and both to provide them ongoing information, but also for us to ask the questions. So that's what I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Rick. Any questions of Rick Richmond? All right, seeing none. I guess the next item on our agenda is really an announcement of the workshop on managed lanes to be held October 13th. That's an evening event. Rich Clarendon, I assume we'll get our usual invitations, and that this is planned to be a virtual workshop. Is that true?
That is in fact the case. We are planning to have a gentleman by the name of Todd Littman, who's the director of the Victoria Transport Institute in Canada. He's an internationally recognized expert on managed lanes and transit, I might add. Come and speak to us. First the CAC on the 13th, and then the following morning to the MPO board on the 14th. So you all will get sort of the first crack at it, but he does have a very interesting presentation to make on what are managed lanes, how have they worked elsewhere, what are some of the considerations and implications for managed lanes policy. So we look forward to that. And as you mentioned, that is an evening affair for the CAC. It starts at 5:30 on the 13th.
Good, thank you. This is obviously an issue that continues to come before our committee and also comes before the MPO board. So I will encourage all of our committee members to try to attend. And this should be a good time for us to ask those questions that we've been wrestling with now for the better part of a year. What are managed lanes? How are they being implemented in other places? Those types of things. So I'm really very appreciative of staff arranging this special session for our CAC committee members, especially because it's in advance of the MPO board hearing what I suspect will be a similar presentation. So come be welcome and come prepared for that session. Is there any other new business to come before the committee today? Anyone have any new business? Rick Richmond, you have an item?
I just I'm sorry, and I wanted to about the managed lanes, and I'm trying to scramble around and prevent the question. But Rich, you mentioned there was a presentation. Is that going to be available prior? And I apologize if that has been offered and I missed it. So
there will be a presentation made for your workshop on the 13th. If we can get a copy ahead of time, we'll include it in the mail out. But certainly it will be made available during and after the meeting, if nothing else. I'm sure there will be some written material from Mr. Littman.
Okay, thank you. Nothing more, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And Rich Clarendon, let me just ask during that presentation, if there is a question and answer session, which I am hopeful there will be, should the committee members try to prepare questions and submit them in advance, or do you have a format for that meeting in your head yet?
Let's just say the agenda is still in the conceptual phase, but I think Mr. Littman will probably plan on talking for about 20 minutes or so and then take questions. So okay. I think the majority of the meeting will be Q&A.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay, if there are no further items of new business to come before the committee, I'll remind you that our next regular meeting is in November, on November 18th at our usual 9 o'clock time. Seeing no further business, thank you all for attending and your interest, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bill, thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you.